Welcome to episode 141 of Radio 815, the podcast dedicated to examining the work of writer director J.J. Abrams, as well as his greater Bad Robot universe. I'm your host for this week's episode. My name is Marcelo, Inostroza, joined as always by my fellow co-host, Matt Crandall. And on today's edition, we continue going deep into the world of 11/22/63. Today we'll be looking at episode 4, entitled The Eyes of Texas. So, Matt, I have a question for you. Are you a sharpshooter?
I am not. I have never and will never be a sharpshooter. And you can't prove anything. And you got nothing on me. So this episode, we are getting more into the Lee Harvey Oswald. Is he the guy? Do we have the right guy? And as things go, last week he had his I'm gonna hunt fascists freak out. And he had that same line again this week where he's like, I'm going to hunt fascists. So it seems pretty much like this is the guy that is going to pull the trigger. But Jake and Bill, still doing their damnedest to record and make sure that this is the guy. And they start to put a lot of the pieces together of what they think is happening with Lee Harvey Oswald's motivation and General Walker and the CIA. And it's a lot of conspiracy stuff starts to kind of weave its way into this one.
The thing that I really love about this episode is the way that it starts with Lee Harvey Oswald constructing and deconstructing his rifle by himself in his house. There's something so particularly unsettling about that. And even as he's constructing his rifle, he starts talking to himself as if he's still in the military corps, being timed by his supervising officer, watching him build a gun. And he's so focused on it that during one of the builds, his baby starts crying, and he calls for his wife, but his wife obviously doesn't answer because she's outside, and he goes to tend to his baby. But there's something so off-putting about that. And I don't know if it's because I have a pretty strong feeling on personal gun safety, or the fact that it is Lee Harvey Oswald and everything with that. But just real quickly, do you have any thoughts on that particular moment?
I do. One of the running motifs through this episode ends up being, as he's assembling that gun and doing his thing, and quickly, he's got a little mirror that he keeps looking at himself and watching. And this episode has tons of shots of people looking into mirrors and having a reflection, because later there's a Jake and Sadie scene with a giant mirror that's prominent. And the other thing that happens a lot through this episode is people looking through doorways at stuff that maybe they are or aren't supposed to see. So it's a lot about reflected gaze and secretive looks. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that there is a lot of this motif of your reflection and people sort of spying on one another. And I think that it's just saying that, Lee at first is ignoring the cries of even his baby because this is more important. Eventually he realizes okay, I better go get my kid. And he stops. But when he sort of looks at himself dead in the mirror, you can see that this is a man who is not quite human. I'm not saying he's not human, but there's something lurking within that's sinister. And that's the sense we get as he's assembling this weapon and kind of staring dead-eyed at himself in the mirror.
I also think Lee Harvey Oswald is. I mean, I believe I said this last week. I also think that Lee Harvey Oswald is a person that can be manipulated because of his strong beliefs on certain political subjects. Let's say that, and I think that he is the perfect individual that, if the CIA wanted to set him up as the patsy, he's the perfect guy to do that, because somebody like him really only needs a simple push before they go mad. And I think in this episode, the one to do that is General Walker. Although it's not specifically said, you can really see that if General Walker is indeed involved with the CIA, you could see how General Walker has sort of been playing him like a fiddle setting him up for a fall guy or setting him up for something else. So I'm really interested to see how that angle of the entire series works out. With that being said, I think that the entire series has a focus problem, because there are some episodes where we spend it with Jake and Bill and we're with them the entire episode, and they actually accomplish something. They get that much closer to figuring out what's happening with Oswald, what's happening with the guy that's trying to manipulate him. But there are other episodes where that stuff is put to the background and the personal stuff is brought to the forefront. And although I really loved everything with Sadie and Jake in this episode, specifically the second scene of the episode where Sadie is in, I guess, the music room playing a piano, and Jake goes up to her and starts singing a Beatles song to her, is really cool. But I wish that the relationship stuff was put in more organically with the larger plot of the series, because it feels like when the relationship stuff is there, like the more serialized stuff or the history stuff takes a back seat.
It does, and I do think that balance is the weakness of this show, because part of us buying into this whole thing of Jake staying in the past for now, he's been there for 3 years. We are in 1963. We're in March. Is that we're supposed to think his motivation is that he's falling in love with Sadie, so he's going to see this through and stay in this time because of her. But every time they're together, we then go to a scene of him and Bill running around chasing people that I don't feel that he's actually that into Sadie and that invested, because they aren't giving us enough time for that relationship to actually feel real and natural, and for me to actually feel like there's a connection between these two. It feels really forced because we keep cutting back between the conspiracy and this, and neither of them are hitting on the level that would make me think this is why Jake is staying, because his connection with Sadie is so deep, or this is why Jake is staying to fulfill the promise that he made to Chris Cooper, because this conspiracy is really deep and he's got to sort this out. They are both getting, I feel like 60% of the attention that they need to get us across the line. And it would just be so much better if they found a way to actually, every time he starts to chase after, George and Oswald, I feel like he couldn't give a flying fuck about Sadie. And then when he's with Sadie, I feel like he doesn't give a flying fuck about Oswald. And I'm like, well, which is it? Like, it's like I'm watching two different shows.
I think that he doesn't give a flying fuck about either of them enough. And plus, I think that the fact that he loves Sadie is going to bite him in the ass. It is going to affect his overall mission of finding who was the trigger man behind Kennedy's assassination. But also in this episode, we find out some very, very interesting backstory about Sadie's ex-husband and some of his peculiar, how can I say this, sexual urges that I thought wasn't really needed at all. Although although with that being said, I am a fan of the actor because he was George in Grey's Anatomy in the earlier seasons, so it was nice to see him again. But that whole thing about Sadie having a husband with particular sexual urges and her husband not wanting to give her the divorce, I'm like, you guys could cut this in half.
I haven't read the book, so I don't know if this is a case of them condensing the book and just not doing a great job of condensing the material, or are they expanding material from the book for an 8-episode TV show and they're not doing a great job of expanding the material? So I'm not sure which it is, but it just feels like the recipe was slightly off in some way, because there is a lot of stuff that I do like, and obviously we are having fun in this episode where he pretends like he wrote a Beatles song. and he does say, like, with the help of my friends, and he names all the Beatles, but it's before the Beatles time. He has a scene where Ms. Mimi comes and has questions about his background, because as we always see, this guy's a complete fuck up when it comes to like being the inconspicuous and trying to fit in. She's like, you used a different name somewhere else, and now you're using this name? Like, why? And he's like, oh, yeah, because I fucked up and I used my real name at first, and then I realized I should probably have an alias if I've traveled back in time. But I like that his cover story is the plot of The Godfather, which was really funny. And I thought that was, for us as an audience, great. And I love that he's like, the mafia. She's like, the fuck's the mafia? And it's like, okay, I guess there was a time when people in America didn't know about this. Certainly they weren't as connected because all of the mainstream stories about the mob and the mafia hadn't come to pass. And you probably wouldn't open the newspaper and see stories about the mafia because the mafia was keeping those stories out of the paper in 1963. So I thought that was really funny. And it was a little bit weird. His school balance, the way that his principal Deke is kind of like coaching him and concerned about his activities. And I'm like, well, you're just the guy's fucking principal. Like, lay off, man. You're kind of overstepping here. And then, he's at school and he's like, oh, where did that lady go? And like, there's a lot of like weird stuff going on with the school staff other than Sadie that I'm not sure is landing. So it's interesting. And as, again, just kind of being a fuck up, like Jake, when him and they start following Oswald and they think they're going to this CIA meeting and they end up going to a brothel, and Jake doesn't realize until he's about 4 steps away from screwing a prostitute. And then he's like, oh shoot, I shouldn't be here. Like, I'm in the wrong spot. And it's like, I start to wonder, is he stupid? Is this character supposed to be like a dumbass? So it's like, we have this important event we have to stop, but we sent a dude who is just a complete idiot to get this done. And we're not really playing it for laughs. We're kind of playing it for like, oh, can you believe what a stupid idiot this guy is?
Yeah, and also you pointed out the mysterious relationship that his principal has with him. Like earlier on in the episode, when the principal, catch Jake and Sadie making out in the music room on the piano, the principal gives Jake a card to like a cabin, so Jake and Sadie can have a romantic getaway. And after they do the next morning, a letter is dropped underneath the cabin door, and it's pictures of Jake and Sadie making off on the previous night. And Jake's conclusion is that it's the CIA, and I'm like, what? Why in the world would you go to that conclusion? Like, I don't understand how somebody who is supposed to be this smart can be this fucking inept. Like, I'm really starting to think if he still had the books that Chris Cooper had, I think he wouldn't be this inept. But the fact that he doesn't have the books anymore, I think just puts him behind an 8 ball as a character. And as the series goes on, I'm losing interest that he is either going to end up with Sadie or he's going to succeed in his mission, which is something that shouldn't be happening.
It shouldn't. And as you said, I'm happy to see T.R. Knight because, yeah, we've got the dude from Grey's Anatomy here. But so far I hate that Sadie's ex-husband has shown up and he's trying to cause some issues, and we get Sadie's horrendous sexual backstory with this guy. And, I'm not loving the clothespin stuff that we learn, but it gives us more context about why in this time where divorce is so frowned upon that she would want a divorce, because this guy is a little bit of a creep and things aren't working out well. But then he has his scene with Jake and he's like, hey man, like, she's my wife, so why don't you back off? And he's trying to be nice, and then Jake's just like, hey, fuck face. And the guy's like, well, we don't need swearing. And he's like, fuck you, fuck ball. Here's what's going on. And I liked that scene, but the way that they keep juggling between these two things, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like this is going to come back to bite us in some horrible way. And I don't love that we've introduced this painfully weird backstory for Sadie that is obviously just going to cause trouble. And Jake is not handling it in a way that is putting a fire out. The dude's just throwing gasoline on fires everywhere he encounters them. And I'm like, why? Why are you doing this? Like, he thinks he's taking care of it. And he's like, say to Sadie, he's like, we're all good. Like, it's all fine. There's no fucking way this guy's not coming back and going to throw a wrench into things the way that that scene ended. And I just don't know how you can't. This guy has no vibe checks. He doesn't know how to read a room to save his life. And I can't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was you or if it was I, but a couple weeks back, we postulated that this would have made a better movie than a miniseries because if this was a movie, you could cut out all these subcutaneous little story threads that you don't need. You could put Sadie into the main narrative and run it with that. The other thing that I felt wasn't necessary is when they potentially hinted at a relationship between Bill and Oswald's wife, because it's discovered in this movie to the surprise of no one that Oswald beats his wife, and Bill he wants to defend her, he wants to come to her aid, but Jake won't let him do that because if Bill comes to her aid, there's a potential that they can find out that they're being recorded, and that could put a kibosh on the whole thing. Although I don't understand what them doing all the recordings if half of the recordings are in a language that they don't understand, and still they haven't fucking found an English to Russian dictionary. I'm like, but weren't you going to go to the library like last week? What are you doing?
Yeah, it's a little bizarre that we haven't. I feel like we need to have seen them fluently understanding Russian by this point, because we are now a few months later from where we last were. And I know I've read in passing that Bill wasn't a giant part of the book. So I do feel this is the part that they have invented for the show. And it's really confusing because, Marina, who we do seemingly like, because she seems like a nice lady. She's got a baby, and certainly no one deserves to be beaten up by their spouse. And the way that it's sending Bill into this spiral, because it's echoing, his sister was killed by a domestic abuser, and Jake is holding him back. That's really taking a mental toll on Bill. But that makes us think like Bill is going to fuck this whole thing up. Or is Bill going to be the one who actually causes this whole thing to happen? Maybe Oswald is going to be waffling, and the thing that's going to send him over the edge is knowing that his wife has this new friend downstairs that she's getting close to, and that's going to drive him to start murdering the president. Like, I just wonder if we're tipping the scales in a way that's going to be bad, and certainly the way that they are presenting Bill to us as kind of the second fiddle to Jake, who's really put out and a little bit emotional, and he's having some major highs and lows. He gets excited when he wins a bet. He can't stand when he has to spend the whole day listening to Oswald and his wife go at it in both senses of the word. The sex and the physical abuse. And it's like, I just don't know if this feels like too much going on. And especially, you would think Jake would be a little bit more aware of, hey, remember, this is the guy who's doing this thing. He does say, like, she lives, we can't get involved. But why has he let it get this far? That, like, they decided to live underneath them so they could spy better? But he didn't realize that Bill, this lost puppy dog, was going to latch on to someone that maybe he shouldn't, because it's going to make their mission even harder. Again, it's poor planning on Jake's part, where he has no forethought of what could happen, and having Bill just stay indoors all day listening to tapes. I feel like at a certain point, after this has been multiple years that they've been here, like, let's get Bill a job. Let's have this guy fucking leave the house for a few hours a day and have a purpose, and come home and run the tapes back later. So I again, it's just Jake, if you want a plan, don't get Jake Epping to make your plan, because this dude is not great at it. And he's so oblivious that, again, if I am spying on people, even in this time of the 1960s, when I leave the house or if I go somewhere, I might put a cover over my recording equipment. I might put it into a cupboard that I can tuck it away, because, it'd be pretty fucking weird for anybody to walk in and see all this spy shit lying around. But no, he just leaves it all out. And who brings a casserole to thank him for getting her creep husband out of the picture? And when Sadie came and she sees all this shit, I'm like, this guy's an idiot. I can't believe it. What are you thinking as Sadie brings the casserole over and catches a glimpse of all the recording shit?
At that moment, I was like, you motherfuckers, you deserve this shit because you are careless. The other thing that I was thinking is that, okay, finally now next week, he's going to clue her into the plan. She's gonna fight against him for like a half an hour, and then she, against her better judgment, she's going to be on board with him and his greater plan of stopping the murder of someone who's not even president yet. The other thing that I was thinking about this whole episode, I'll get back to the Sadie thing in just one moment. Do you think the death of Bill or either Sadie will finally motivate Jake into just focusing on the fucking whole reasoning why he was there in the first place? Because I feel at this point that is what has to happen. Either Bill has to die or Sadie has to die. If either of those two die, I think Jake will finally stop fucking around and focus.
Yeah, I think that definitely could be like a wake-up call that might jolt him into realizing why he's there and the bigger ramifications of everything he's trying to do. But I'm not sure. We also, as Sadie is in the apartment, catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure there, and I'm starting to wonder, okay, what's going on with this? I thought for a second, I was like, is Sadie going to get murdered? And then it's like, okay, no, somebody's snooping around. What are you thinking as we see the shadowy figure walking around the apartment and Sadie is in there as well?
Well, I'm thinking that is a shadow of the past, pushing back on Sadie actually being there in the first place. Because as this series established in the beginning, there's this mysterious force that knows when something isn't going the way it should be going, and when the past feels like something is pushing up against it or there's something there that shouldn't be there, it just shows up in increments. Like the first time that Jake went through the rabbit hole, when he came out through the other side, there was this reporter guy that kept asking him, "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." So I think that guy, walking behind Sadie as she discovers Jake's tape in the basement, which I thought was the last line of this episode was a very, very lost moment, I thought. But I really, really, really feel, first of all, I didn't feel that something was going to happen to Sadie in that moment, but I really, really feel that if Jake doesn't level with Sadie and if she doesn't find a way to believe what he's saying, I think she's going to die. But I think that's what needs to happen at this moment or in the next couple of weeks.
Well, and I also wonder because previously in the episode, I mentioned when they went to the brothel or whatever, Bill and Jake get arrested, and it's the principal who bails him out. In a small town like this, isn't Sadie gonna find out like dude got arrested for soliciting hookers? I still feel like that shoe is going to drop at some point. Like it almost, if it's not, I don't know. But also, if my boss bails me out of jail, I don't know that I still have a job the next day. So I'm starting to ask some more questions. It will be interesting to see if they do up the stakes by offing someone close to Jake soon. One other thing I want to mention, I did mention earlier the Godfather thing, and shortly thereafter they used on the soundtrack, the music cue was "And Then He Kissed Me," which is a famous song from, like Motown era or whatever, but was most famously used in two movies. Adventures in Babysitting, which is the opening song, but also Goodfellas. It's one of the key moments of Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. So I thought it was kind of interesting that this has a needle drop that is 100% associated with Goodfellas and name checks and plot checks The Godfather within it. So it was interesting that, those two things happened in the same episode. For any other, mafia, mobster movie fans, that's kind of like a lean forward moment when both of those things happen.
Yeah, I mean that moment was very very cool. I mean, I'm a fan of Marty Scorsese. I am, but every time I hear that song, I just think of the oner going through the restaurant in Goodfellas. Such a good shot. It's unbelievable how he orchestrated that. But anyway, we're not here to talk about Marty or the Goodfellas. Um, Again, there were things that I liked in this episode, but I had a lot more problems than I didn't with this episode, and I just hope that in the weeks to come, it it gets more focused because right now the only thing that is keeping me watching the show is the fact that we have to talk about it every week.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed this episode more than I did last week's episode, but I am a little bit more frustrated with this show than I thought I would be, and I'm really hoping that in the back half they can start to right the ship and justify everything that I kind of feel like we've been dropping the ball on so far. And I'm willing to go with it, and maybe they will find a way to surprise me, so we'll see.
All right, guys. On that note, that'll do it for this edition of Radio 815. Listen, guys, if you like anything that we do here and you want to write us an email to tell us how good we are or to give us suggestions about what we should talk about in the future, you can email us at radio815 at AOL.com, or you can follow us at the Mixtape Pod on X, Twitter, or whatever it's called these days, or you can follow us on Radio 815 on YouTube, where you can catch all our back episodes. Subscribe to the channel there, leave some comments, do all the lovely stuff that you do if you want to support us or whatever. But if you want to catch me and talk to me about anything having to do with this show or anything related to J.J. Abrams at all, you can at me on X. I'm at CreekFanatic88. But Matt, if the good folks want to bother you about anything at all, what will be the place for them to do that on?
On Blue Sky, Cinematic Crandall dot whatever the hell the Blue Sky extensions are, but you can find me on there.
All right, guys. So thank you so much for listening. But until next time, as always, we'll talk back soon.
Radio 815 is a Balloonhead Productions presentation in association with Killer Newt Productions.